What started as a small and simple idea has now grown into a student-led initiative that is bringing health and education reform here in the kingdom. The group I'm speaking of is the King's Academy Club, started by a group of students called Kursi and Kitab. The group aims to aid those suffering from cerebral palsy. Now, cerebral palsy remains a murky area for doctors since its causes and effects remain unclear and inconsistent. Cerebral palsy is a result of abnormal brain development or an injury to the brain, causing physical impairment. This can lead to the loss of one's ability to control one's muscles, making a job such as sitting down or tying one's shoes very, very difficult. We also know that cerebral palsy is not life-threatening, meaning most children who suffer from cerebral palsy will live well into adulthood. Keeping that in mind, we also know that cerebral palsy is permanent and is currently incurable. But on the bright side, cerebral palsy is manageable. There are ways in which we can ease the lives of those suffering from cerebral palsy. And this is where Kursi and Kitab came in, a club or a co-curricular that started with a group of 5 to 10 students aiming to bring aid to cerebral palsy patients. And like I said, the group started off very small, very simple. And to illustrate that, we have Sunjung Son, one of the co-founders of the group, to explain a little bit about what they did. So you mentioned you were in the co-curricular Kursi and Kitab since freshman year. Can you tell me what you've been doing since then in terms of helping the group?
So in the beginning we started with small things such as fundraising to buy wheelchairs for cerebral palsy students. But then after that we decided to actually go out in Jordan and see what cerebral palsy students face in Jordan. And we visited some facilities, visited some cerebral palsy schools, hospitals, and realized that to make an actual change in Jordan, buying wheelchairs was not enough. We needed an actual basic change, an infrastructure change. That we needed better facilities, better programs, better training for these cerebral palsy students to grow up, learn, and be integrated into society as normal people would, because they deserve to be.
So it started off, as you said, very simply, just offering wheelchairs and other equipment to cerebral palsy patients. But what is it that made these students stick to this initiative? Sirine Hakkawi, another co-founder of the group, is here to explain a little bit about that. So Sirine, you were one of the co-founders of Kursi and Kitab here at King's. Could you tell me what brought you to continue committing to this group?
Well, you see, I don't have a personal connection to cerebral palsy. I don't have a family member or a friend or a distant relative who has cerebral palsy. It was more of a human-to-human connection that I made. I joined it just because I felt that this was a cause worth fighting for. And through meeting people who have cerebral palsy, I realized my passion grew. To help them, and those personal connections that I made with those who have cerebral palsy and their family members is why I continued. For example, we used to hold small sessions for those with cerebral palsy and their parents, like children, like arts and crafts and dinners and playing games. But at the end of every session, we would meet with the parents. And because I was one of the few people in the group who could speak Arabic, so I was in the session, and they would just let it all out. They'll say all their frustrations, all their fears that they're facing with because their children have cerebral palsy. And I remember one woman, Mahmoud, she told me how she had to quit her job and her husband had to get another job because her son wasn't allowed to continue schooling after a certain grade. There were no facilities for him to go to finish schooling in. In Jordan, you have to finish 12th grade Tawjihi in order to work in the country.
Allow me to stop her there for a second and just explain what Tawjihi is. Sirine mentioned that a Jordanian, in order to acquire a job here in Jordan, needs to pass his Tawjihi. And the Tawjihi is basically a set of exams and certain topics that every high school student has to pass in order to get into university. For ordinary students, the exams are known to be very hectic, with students needing to acquire very high grades in order to study here in Jordan.
So he couldn't finish, but that didn't stop her. She quit her job, like I said, and she taught herself physics and chemistry and all these subjects that she never learned before. She bought the books and she taught herself, and she taught her son Mahmoud, and she pushed really hard. And her son is intelligent. Cerebral palsy doesn't affect your mental capabilities most of the time. It's just physical. So he was able to do it, and he took Tawjihi and he passed. But the struggles that she went through, and what her husband went through, and her kids, and the rest of the family, in order to do something so simple as go to school, something that we take for granted, is probably one of the stories that stuck with me since then.
So not only the cerebral palsy patients suffering, but so are their friends and family as they try to ease the process of overcoming this condition. So what is it that makes the situation so difficult? Is it the condition itself, the lack of facilities? Here again is Sireen on that answer.
So we went and we wanted to assess the situation in Jordan, actually. Because hearing stories from people, yes, they're important, but you don't know the level of exaggeration. So we wanted to see it firsthand. We didn't visit all of them. We visited the larger ones, the most well-known in Amman, the capital, and the one facility we visited, you can just tell from the outside that it was small and kind of worn out a little bit from the outside, and it couldn't hold more than 25 patients. So you first walk in, just by the looks of it, you have the receptionist, 3 of them actually. They're happily sitting at the reception, welcoming us in, and then you turn to your left, and there's this tiny little classroom. Lights aren't working, carpet is pulled out, paint is chipping off the walls, a few toys here and there that seemed worn out, and 1 counselor. And then you walk a little bit, maybe 2 steps, the facility again is pretty small, and there is where the physician is. Again, 1 physician, maybe a few pieces of equipment, not much going on. So by the looks of it, the facilities weren't adequate. And the capacity wasn't large enough, and the building itself wasn't fit for its job. So we went upstairs to meet with the owner of this foundation, the one who's running it. And you walk upstairs, you smell this freshly painted walls, and the plastic is still on the air conditioning that's just installed. There's this new large oak table that has a tag still on it, and new chairs. And
again, this is the administrative office, not the patients from the children's area.
This lady comes in well-dressed and put together, and she starts talking about the facility. And we asked to see some papers, some stats, a brochure maybe, and she gives us a brochure. It was very outdated. I think in the late 1960s was the date written on it. She didn't even know the names of her patients, and she didn't seem interested in improving the facility that they lived in and that they learned in, and she just seemed indifferent to work with us. So it wasn't just that the actual facility wasn't fit, but that people in Jordan had a different mindset. People weren't concerned with those who have cerebral palsy. And it wasn't, until recently, even until today, people struggle with the idea that their child or their cousin or their sister has a disability. It's not something widely accepted. It's something that people still think of as shameful. And so it's not just the fact that we have limitations of resources, but this old mindset that we're still trying to overcome is hindering our progress, hindering our ability to help those.
In addition to Jordan being ill-equipped and inexperienced in treating these patients, Jordan has a very high rate of cerebral palsy patients. In most developed countries, the number of patients per 1,000 is down to 1.5, whereas here in Jordan, that number goes up to 4 per 1,000 people. In addition, the Cerebral Palsy Foundation found approximately 19,543 cases of children with cerebral palsy in only the past 2 years. So the situation is clearly in dire need of reform. So what do the King's students do?
So we decided to contact this renowned Cerebral Palsy Institute in Hungary called Pedo Institute. And fortunately, they agreed to come last year for a conference at Queen Rania Hospital in Jordan to start the process of bringing their program called Conductive Education to Jordan in the future. So this year, we're actually working to bring conductive education to Jordan in the future. So far we have worked on the proposal and getting donations and figuring out the logistics for the trainers from Hungary to come to Jordan, and which students and how many students from Jordan that we can include in this program, etc.
So Kursi with Kitab, a group of 5 to 10 students, went from simply providing equipment like wheelchairs and books to raising awareness. And with that awareness that they raised, with their motivation, They have managed to bring help from places like Hungary and the Pito Institute. Help that will hopefully reform the health and education system we have here in Jordan, easing the lives of those suffering from cerebral palsy, and perhaps extend beyond the borders of that one condition. A small group, the core of which held about 3 to 5 students conducting the whole operation, managed to bring change to a country that other organizations are still trying to do. So the fact that it was a small group and was comprised of students doesn't stop them from creating change. And I think that's something that most high school students don't realize, is the opportunities they have to create that change. As Sirin said, you don't have to have a personal connection with a certain situation or topic in order to address it. You just need the motivation. And that motivation comes from their will to do good. The will that these students had, and that brought them to raise that awareness and bring that help. So to conclude, I'd like to ask you, what is there in your community that you can change? A health or education issue? Find it, address it, whether by yourself or with a group of friends, and you will find yourself doing greater things than you would have expected.